this session, I want to talk about how narcissism presents itself. The behaviours that we typically see. Now, many of us already know this, but I think the point is that at the core of why they behave and why they do what they do, it all comes down to a fundamentally haunted by a very, very low self-esteem. So consequently, all these traits and behaviours are just one massive big defence strategy, to stop them being found out. And the irony is the very strategies they adopt to try to be accepted and wanted and valued actually push people away. But that's because these were strategies they learned as a very naive young kid when they're trying to make sense of the world that wasn't exactly supporting them. Now, there are some narcissistic tendencies that are maybe we just put up with it, less harmful, it's more about them, and we can live with them, and others which are more damaging. So let's try to explore those two things. So the less harmful ones, like for them, actually, they could be massive overachievers because this inner drive to prove, means that actually they often, do put all of the work in and they do over deliver. And obviously they often therefore get promoted because again, they are unashamedly self-promoting what they've done. And as we'll see a bit later on, maybe overclaiming what they did. They have a craving for admiration, which is all about to reaffirm their idolized self. They need people to mirror back to them how good they are. You'll come out of a meeting with them and say, that was a really good meeting. I thought you did really well there. When what they really say is, tell me how good I was, and they have a compulsive need for external symbols of success. It basically because they didn't get that from their core caregivers. Because within their head, they've got a little what's called internal working model of, the hypothesis of how the life works. Is like, if I'm successful, I will be accepted, admired, respected, and I'll be seen of value because basically when they're very young, they weren't admired, respected, and valued. So in that sense, titles become incredibly important. I'm not just a VP, I'm an EVP or I'm SVP. The car they drive, the clothes they wear, the watch they've got, the bag they've got, the partner they've got. These are all trophies and obviously the friends they surround themselves. So losers don't apply. They don't want to be associated with anyone like that because they need to be surrounded by other people who are successful. They also have an inflated sense of self-importance, that grandiosity and entitlement, a belief they really are superior and special and actually exempt from standard rules. Do you not know who I am? And I don't need to do all this stuff. And certainly all the stuff we're seeing going on in the press right now is that people with that massive sense of self-entitlement don't play by the rules the rest of us are expected to go and play by. And obviously, they eventually get their comeuppance. And there's a boasting and a bragging and what I call an inflation of agency. So what they'll do is there'll be a lot of name dropping. Oh, I was with James at his cottage last weekend. Do you not know James? Which is obviously a put down to you. Oh, and yes, it was me who did this. And they'll do this. When I went on to that account, it was a disaster. It was all over the place, but I turned it around. And sometimes what they'll do, they'll create a disaster to solve the disaster, so therefore they can be the hero of the hour. And often they like to be the center of attention. They'll monopolize conversations, they'll butt in, and they'll take it back to what they've done. And they can be very impulsive. Now, so these are all like, oh, God, blimey, here, she, or he goes again. Now let's talk about some of the more damaging things that people can and sometimes do. This isn't all the time. Now, Clearly, for a person with narcissistic tendency, power is their key currency. They must be superior. And thereby, by hook or by crook, they're going to make sure that they are in a dominant place. They'll use charm, or they use force, or they use bullying, but they'll get their way. And if someone gets challenged, they'll be met with quite fierce opposition. And so therefore they have this obsession with being in control, and they can be quite binary about things. It's my way or no way, and are you for me or are you against me? And they can be very good at like closing down conversations that they don't agree with. Say, no, we're not going there, we're not going to talk about that, you know. And obviously within that becomes a degree of manipulation. They will very often rewrite facts. No, that's not the case. Or they'll dispute. Yeah, but the evidence isn't very strong on that, is it really? And of course, as I said, they'll use their charm and force to get their way in that space. And they can often sort of plot and scheme because they need to be in this superior place. They basically want to make sure that actually they've got to win, and they've got to win at all costs. And therefore they will sort of like somehow undermine, and they will back talk about people. They will be very politic, and they can sometimes like withhold information that would be useful. So they're not playing a fair game because they've got to be the one who wins out. And within this, they are deeply envious and deeply competitive and deeply comparative with others. How come they've got a slightly bigger office than me? How come their parking space is slightly closer to the building than mine is? All this stuff becomes a real sort of resentful place which builds in them. And therefore they'll find ways of actually acting that stuff out. And you know, they often hold a grudge and will make sure that they get that dealt with. And in terms of playing that superiority, they've got a whole range, a panoply of different strategies, from mild ones to quite extreme ones. They're masters at it. You know, from the little gentle put downs, the sneers, the jakes, the japes, the gentle undermining you, the criticisms, the more passive aggressive attacks, the gaslighting, the talking behind your back, the twisting things around, making you the problem. And of course, all this can be delivered not just in language, but in non-verbal communication. You'll see they'll roll their eyes like, or they'll, what's that about? Oh, really? You know, and if you challenge them, say, oh, you can't take a joke. You know, so they'll turn it around. I didn't know you were so sensitive, you know. And there is very little empathy they have for other people because they're so wrapped up in themselves of what's going on, and they're so worried of being criticised and being found out that basically they're all in a place of self-protection, and they don't have the space to relax where they are to really be in a place of empathy for other people. And pulling on from there is therefore there's this massive oversensitivity to criticism, you know, and they can often see platform attacks, phantom attacks. They can see things to be, you know, something that is meant in a quite, you know, benign way is taken to be an attack. And then they can then very often get what's called into narcissistic rage, this absolute explosion, which is a very good strategy to stop you because most people don't want to deal with that level of aggression. And so they're like, ooh, but they back off. So they've learned this is a strategy that really keeps them safe. You know, it's a bit like a rat that's been cornered. If they feel they're going to be really hurt, they're going to go and attack back. You know, and so this idea they can be deeply resentful and hold a grudge. And in many ways, you know, punishment to fit the crime. No, actually, very often they will go back at a much deeper, a much darker level of actually hurt and punishment to a person than actually crime, because they see it to be at a massively level of a crime. You really have attacked me. And as I say, hurt people. Now, on a personal front, underneath all this facade they've got, there is actually very often a deep emptiness. And the irony about this is that in their desire to control relationships, to hold people at arm's length, the very thing they actually want, which is to be accepted and wanted and loved, get from their mother and father, is actually pushing people away. And then at the very bottom of that can very often lie depression. Now, we can live with this, obviously, and we can do different ways of how we deal with it, and we'll come on to that later on. But you know, the reality is that if we do not deal with these issues, then these are defense strategies that are trying to deal with this basic fault, as sort of Bannon would talk about it, which is going to be reenacted time and time and time and time again. It's not going to go away. So actually it is within the interest of everyone that we help that person realize the impact they're having upon other people. So we can get them to move on, and so we can have a more healthier workplace.